Well, welcome back everyone. You join me on an absolutely stunning morning down here on Fontegary Ledges. Now for today, as you can tell by the title of the video, it's something a bit different, and that is all about mullet fishing today. I've left the big rods at home, so I thought, you know, we're coming into June now. Well, we're into June, I think it's the 11th today. So it's a perfect time to start focusing on the mullet fishing, which I didn't really fish for at all last summer, which is a shame really, because I do love my mullet fishing. So I've set it to myself now this summer is to spend quite a few hours fishing for them. So what I'll do in this session, I'll run you through all the ground bait I use, the hook baits, the kind of rod and reel I like to use, the terminal tackle, and then a few bits that I like to bring extras like in my rucksack. So yeah, we're here on Fontegary. We've got a nice building tide and obviously high water, like I said, and it's fairly settled. There's no wind at all this morning, so I've got a good feeling. Although it's my first session this season, so we don't know until we try. So first thing I'm going to do is run you through the ground bait I use and how I set it up, because I really want to get some ground bait in to start drawing them in, because it's fishable now. So let's move on with that, and fingers crossed we'll get some mullet in the net. Right, so first things first, like I said, is the ground bait. Now, if any of you are familiar with the mullet fishing, you'll know there's only really one. The most famous one is just a loaf of white bread, and lots of it. I think having plenty is quite an important thing. So just your normal, just the cheapest stuff you can find really that you've got in the supermarkets. Doesn't have to be anything special for the ground bait. So I normally bring 5 loaves. And one thing I will say, when you're buying loads of bread in the supermarket, you don't have to get some weird looks walking around with like almost 10 loaves of bread. So yeah, I bring 5 loaves whole. I got a loaf for hook baits, and then I'll have another 2 loaves that I've blitzed up in a food processor. So that is, I'm going to talk about why I do that separately in a minute. But first things first is making the main ground bait. So I literally first things first, I need to get some water in the bucket, and then I'll literally rip up all the bread. Just rip it up into like as small as you can get it really. Throw it all in. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Get in there, mush it all up so it's a nice sloppy mix. And that is the first thing that's going to go in, because that's got a bit more weight to it. It'll get down there and hold better with the swell. Whereas the blitzed bread, because it's so fine and fluffy, and with it being so light, it's just going to lift up in the water. It's going to move off too quick, and it's too light for baiting up in heavier amounts. And then another thing, you can just fish just bread on its own, but there's one more bait I like to use in there, and that is mackerel. You can use tin tuna, but I prefer to use more natural stuff. So I've got 6 mackerel there. I'm going to keep one aside as a spare, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is basically the hook baits. So I'm going to get 5 out of there now, take the skin off, take all the bones out, mush them up into the bread, and that will be a perfect ground bait. So I'm going to get that on the go now. Well, I'm going to get some water first, and then I'll bring you back to show you actually making the ground bait. Right, so I've got some water in the bucket, and I've just cut the mackerel up into loads of little pieces. I haven't quite gone through all 5, because I figured I'm going to make a little mix up first. So I'll just use 1 pack. So like I said, with the bread, literally just rip it up into little pieces, get it in there, and like I said, also don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, get it stuck in, get it all broken up, and get it all nice and sludgy. Because what you will find, the bigger the pieces, the more you're going to feed the mullet, and they're not going to necessarily take your hook bait when there's loads of big pieces. You just lowering your chances of them finding your hook bait, which is kind of why the blitz bread is really good, because it's so fine where it's not necessarily going to fill them up as much as bigger pieces. Just a couple of loaves in there now, so let's put 1 more loaf. I'll keep 2 aside for now. I can always add a bit more later. Right, so if you can see, so let's bring it a bit closer. So there it is in there. And you just put your hands in and just give it a good old squish up. And as you're doing that, it's just going to mix up all the mackerel in with it. And you, like I said, you can use tin tuna. I've had good success with it. And they've got the juices in there, or the oils and stuff. But if I have got mackerel there, I'd much prefer that. Like if you're last minute and obviously in the supermarket buying the bread, it obviously kind of makes sense to just buy your tin tuna there as well. That's getting quite a nice consistency now. So if you can see that is the ground bait. Lovely. That's a proper sloppy mix, that, which is perfect really. It's not too wet and it's not too dry. I like it a bit wetter than what you'd want it, because as the session goes on it's just going to naturally dry on its own. And with it being a bit more watery, when you put it in the water, it'll sort of create a bit of a cloud, and then as the tide takes it, it will sort of draw mud in from a further distance to make sure the mackerel bits are mushed up as well. That's ideal really, that's perfect. So what I'll do now is get a bit in the water, and that can start working for us while I give my hands a clean and run through the gear we're going to use for the day. I'm just going to throw some in. I'm just going to just splatter it around a little bit. Now it's sinking nice down there now. Shortly I will set the camera, well when I start fishing I'll set the camera up where you can see the water where it's going on. I'll chuck in a few handfuls. For now that should do, a little bit more. I normally start off with a bit more than what I would normally do through the session, just to get a good scent going. So right, I'm going to get my hands cleaned up and I'll bring you back to show you the setup I'm going to use. Right, so the setup and end tackle I like to use is pretty basic, to be honest. You don't have to overcomplicate it. So I'll run through my end tackle first. And when you fish in the open sea, off any rocks or harbour walls or anything, the best method is a float. Whoa, gonna get splashed here. Bit of a swell going on. But so yeah, the float fishing is the best method because you can adjust the height you're fishing your bait at. And it's just generally the best method, because if you fish hard on the bottom, you got to worry about where you're fishing it because of snags, kelp and all that kind of stuff. So float fishing is the best. And the mullet will sometimes be hard on the bottom, they'll be mid-water, they'll be on the surface. So having a float allows you to adjust your depth you're fishing. So I'm fishing 8-pound fluoro main line, and literally you're fishing your main line all the way down to your hook. Everything goes up your main line. So I start off with a small float stop, and then a bead and a float sleeve, which is basically a swivel with a rubber sleeve on it, which slides over the end of your float. It makes it easy to adjust the size of your float, because if you want to go, like say you might find the fish are in a lot deeper water and a bit further out, so you might want to fish a heavier float to get down there quicker. Or sometimes you'll find it right, like there might be like a foot under the surface or less, so you might really want to fish a very light float. So I'm using a Drennan Giant Crystal, I think it's called, yeah, the Giant Crystal. Now the weight for this is 3.5 grams or 4.5 double A's. Now with the split shots is the more commonly used way of obviously weighting your float, but I prefer Olivettes. So if any of you haven't seen Olivettes, if you can see that there, just basically like an olive shaped lead with 2 rubber sleeves attaching onto your line. So you slide 2 rubber sleeves up your line first, tie your hook on, and then you just push the Olivette either side, well the sleeves either side of the Olivette. I'll show you in a bit more of a detail of that later. I'm going to set the camera up a bit better so you can see everything in a bit more focused detail. Now with that being a 3.5 gram float, instead of fishing one weight of 3.5, I fish a 1.5, a 1 gram and another 1 gram. Because I find if you got the weight sort of tapering down and more weight going down the length of your line, when they pick your bait up, as they pull away with it, it's not as much weight and resistance. So that is why I fish like that. And also in the swell, it sort of just moves naturally, where if it's just you float at the top and one heavy weight at the bottom, it's just not really, I mean, you know, you will obviously catch fish, but I find it just fishes better. And like I said, the fish don't feel the resistance quite as much. And then I'm running that down to a small size 12 hook. I'll talk about the hook patterns I like to use in a bit when I run through all the gear I like to bring. Now I wouldn't go any smaller than a size 12, and then I will go bigger then. I'll go all the way up to a size 6 depending on the mullet in front of me, the size of them. So then moving on to the gear. So for the gear, now traditionally if you're fishing a float, you'd fish a float rod. Now I used to fish a float rod. I used to fish with a Drennan Aculite carp waggler, I think it was, and I used to catch a lot of fish, but there was some times where I would struggle hooking them, actually getting that hook set. And I do a lot of mullet fishing in Barry Dock with a good mate of mine, Daniel Crump of Halton Road Angling in Barry. And the one day we went fishing and he was using quite a stiff spinning rod, and he found it's better for setting that hook just to get that hook into the fish's mouth, because a spinning rod has a lot stiffer tip than a float rod. So I've started using spin rods since, and the hook rate is much better. So nice one, Daniel Crump. I've got to be fair, he is, you know, a very, very good mullet angler. Brought up in like fishing on Barry Dock in that area, and he, I've got to be fair, he catches fish out of that dock like no one's business. So using a slightly stiffer tipped float rod is a brilliant method. And then I'm running down to a little small reel. That's a HTO Nebula 4000, yeah, 4000. But the rod is a HTO Tempest Outer Limits, and it is quite a heavy rod. It's up to 42 gram, I think it is. Yeah, 10 to 42 gram, which is a very heavy rod for mullet fishing. But there's ways you can fight the fish, which will obviously absorb all the lunges, so you're not going to pull the hooks. And that's obviously fishing a very light drag. And fishing a reel with a very smooth drag is so important. So you loosen that off and it's such a smooth drag. Now if you fish a reel with a sticky drag, and what I mean by sticky drag, you'll find you pull and they get to a point where no line's coming off, and then it will just give line, and then you'll, every now and then it will just be like that. And what you'll find is as that mullet goes, it's just a lot of resistance, and then as the drag pulls off the reel, it'll just pull the hooks because it's sharp. It's quite hard to explain, but when you actually fish and you notice these things, it kind of makes sense as it plays out. And then fishing, like I said, 8-pound fluoro on there. And I think that's about it gear wise, just to get you started. And I am dying to get a bait in the water, so I think that's about it for the gear. It's nothing too complicated, mullet fishing. You can overcomplicate it, you're more than welcome, but to be honest, there's just no need. So what I will do is just have a few casts now, just to see if there's any bites going on, and then I'll run you through hook baits and what I like to use to catch the elusive mullet. Right, so moving on to the hook baits I like to use. Now there's only 3, but the most commonly used for my fishing and just generally for mullet fishing is bread. Now it's the easiest bait to use. It catches mullet wherever you go, worldwide. It's just mullet fishing is mullet, and that's also the good thing with mullet fishing. They are everywhere. No matter where you go in the world, there's mullet. Like normally there's mullet, so it's a nice thing to do if you're on holiday. Take a lot of travel rod and fish for mullet, and obviously then bread is easy to get access to. So one thing I will say about using bread for your hook bait is Bracey's bread is the best. That's my opinion anyway. People laugh at me when I say that, but I find it's because Bracey's is quite doughy. When you feel it compared to the cheaper bread, it's a bit more doughy, so the mullet have a harder time to get it off the hook. Especially when it's wet, it gets even more doughy. And also with your hook baits, as you're fishing, try and keep your bread like closed, because if you leave it open, it'll just dry out in the sun and it gets hard to put on the hook. So the cheaper breads you'll find are very dry, and when you put them on the hook there, it comes off a bit easier. So I'll buy the cheapest bread I can find for the ground bait, because it doesn't matter for that. But with the hook baits, I'll only ever use Bracey's. And then moving on to 2 other baits. So the other one is a good old mackerel. Now mackerel is a bit of a funny one because it's quite a hard bait to use, but it can be a very good bait, but more so when you're fishing marinas or harbours where commercial boats being fished, whether they're pleasure boats or charter boats or the big commercial trawlers, whatever, because the mullet are used to the boats being clean at the end of the day and bits of fish going in, and they're used to the scent of fish a lot more than bread. So another thing with mullet, you want to fillet them. I'll show you a bit later, but you want to fillet them, take the skin off. You don't want any skin on your hook because it won't take it, and then just put the flesh on. But as you can imagine, with it being a very soft fleshed fish, it's quite hard to get on the hook. And then another one, bit of a weird one that people don't really think about, I don't think, is prawns. Not just, I mean, prawns from the supermarket will probably work just as well. Well, I wouldn't say just as well actually, but they are little prawns that I just find on the beaches. So they're a very natural bait for the mullet. So what I do with them, I just peel them, take the tail off and just thread the tail on, and they can work very well. But they're out of all the three, that the way I explained it is my most favourite to the start, which is bread, then mackerel, then the prawns. But the only thing with using the mackerel and prawns is that you will get played sometimes by other fish. Like around here, there's a lot of little schoolie bass, the gobies, blennies. I've had pollock here. There's a few wrasse about at the minute, by all accounts. So fishing like that, you will catch more species, but you won't catch as many more mullet. And obviously when you're mullet fishing, you want the mullet. So bread is the best, really, to be honest. So I'm going to start with bread. Obviously the seagulls are starting to pester me out there now as the bait's going in. So I'm going to get these aside now, and then I'm going to start getting some bait up there, start fishing, set the camera up so it's easier for you to see, and with a bit of luck we might get a mullet or two today. But it's still early in the season, I will say that, but I figured why not do the video early, because any of you that want to go mullet fishing, it's up early for you to know what to do and what gear to get. So yeah, I think the next thing now is get some bread on the hook, which I'll show you how I do that, and then put bread in water and hopefully pull mullet out of water. That's the plan anyway. It won't go as easy as that, I don't think, but we can always try. So let's get on with it. Right, well, as you can see, we are in a slightly different venue than the first few clips of the video, and obviously I'm in my work clothes. So basically I was sat in the workshop just then editing the video ready to upload for the weekend, and I basically made a mistake in explaining how I bait up the three baits that I most commonly use for the mullet, and I was going to just crack on and put it in, and I thought I'd rather just do it again and do it properly. So basically here I am, I just quickly got some bait, got a bit of gear, run down the beach, and I thought I'd just do it properly. So what I'll do now is show you how I bait up my three most favourite baits, which is bread, mackerel, and the prawns. Now the prawns are one that people don't, I've never met anyone that uses them. I remember years ago I was looking at a Sea Angler magazine, and there's a guy using them in a mullet article in that, but really small ones. But like that's, a mullet won't necessarily go for a prawn that big, but the way I bait it up, it becomes smaller of a bait and more manageable for the mullet to swallow down. So what I'll do now is basically run you through baiting up each of the three baits. Right, so starting with the most commonly used in all types of mullet fishing, bread. I basically, you can use the crust. I mean, if I was to fish a crust, I'd actually pull off a piece like I did then and just cut a very small cube of it, like so. I mean, you could have gone smaller really. Let's cut a bit smaller, because when bread gets wet it expands and becomes bigger. And I literally just hook it through once. I find with the crust, the more you mess with it, the more sort of brittle it becomes. So yeah, like so, literally just really simple. You don't need to put it through more. But I'm not a massive fan of the crust. It comes off very, very easy. So what I do, I get a section of the bread out that is about, and obviously this determines on the size of your hook, really. In this video I'm using a size 6 to show you. I'll put it against the bread, look, see it a bit better. There's a size 6 hook there, which is, it's quite small, size 6, and it's also with mullet, it's surprising how big of a hook they will actually take. And a lot of the time I find that you pull the hooks less with bigger hooks, because I think they just get a better hold in the fish's mouth. So going on to bait the bread. Now, it's a very simple way of doing it. It's getting sort of a square, if you like, and then I get the hook, and I hook it over the top of the bread, and then so the hook is laying flat again to like so. Then I fold the bread around the top like that, so the hook's underneath there, as you can see. Then I just pinch that 2 or 3 times around the tip, trying not to pinch too far down, because what you'll find, the more that you pinch, the more the mullet will get put off by it, basically, because they don't like hard baits. They like it nice and fluffy. So that there is perfect. Now that is how I bait it up with a float. There's a slightly different way I bait it up when I'm fishing on the bottom, ledgering for them, but I'll explain that more when I actually do the ledgering video for them. Because what you'll find, if you're getting bites that you're not going to strike, say they're a lot of small fish, and you'll just go to check your bread, what you'll find is you'll reel it in, and that little bit that you squeeze at the top will be left on the line, and that will slide down to the top of the hook, and all the fluffy bit is gone, because as they come up, they'll mouth at it and just eat all the fluffy stuff and then leave the rest. So keeping it like that is the best way, and obviously the hook being at the bottom, and then all this will expand a bit in the water, and then the fish will come up, mouth it down, obviously, because the majority of it is fluffy, and left alone, there's more of a chance of them swallowing the whole thing down, and with your hook as well, and obviously which will lead into you having a much higher chance of hooking the mullet. And I don't really bait it up any other way when I'm fishing the float, because that's what's worked best for me over the years. So I'm not a kind of person to change something if it works. So what I'll go on to next is explaining how I bait up the mackerel. Now the mackerel is another one that is a bit of it's one to get right, and if you don't get it right, you don't really get many bites at all, or you will get bites but you won't end up leading into hooking the fish. So as usual, I've talked about with a lot of my baits is keeping them as cold as possible and in best quality as possible, so like that is quite firm out the freezer. So what I do, if I just take a little bit off the end of the fish, so if I just cut a little piece off the back, and then what you'll find with the mullet is they won't eat the skin. Like I said with the bread, they don't like hard baits. So let's cut a bit of flesh off there and get rid of the skin, because they physically can't break that down because they haven't got teeth and they got little soft gums, so they like that, they physically can't actually get down into their mouth. So get rid of that. And that's also another reason why I don't typically put it in my ground bait, is because what you'll find, you'll actually watch them. If you ever see a little mullet on the surface while you're fishing, just throw a bit of the skin on the surface, and what you'll find, all the little fish will grab it, and one of them will just grab it and just swim away with it, and then all be following it around this one like bit of skin, eating all the bits of flesh off. And it's the same with your bait, because they can't get that in their mouth and actually swallow it down. So there's a piece of the flesh. Now, as you could imagine, mackerel flesh is very soft, so it's another one where the more you mess with it, the sort of softer it becomes. So I literally just really gently thread it on. I'm not going to put quite as much as that whole piece, and it seems a bit of a, well, it seems quite tidy actually, just like that, if you can see that. Now you'll find the mullet will come up to that, and because it's all soft, there's more of a chance of the mouth and the whole thing, rather than just picking off the flesh off the skin. So that is, again, another simple way of baiting up. But like I said at the start, the mullet fishing is not very complicated. It's quite a simple way of fishing, but there's a few little things to do which obviously helps you get those few extra bites and then go on to leading to hooking more fish. So next up is the prawn. Right, so baiting up the prawns, I just pull the head off. Now these I net out of low water rock pools. I just go on, like most beaches, you'll get them. And the head I just pull off, I get rid of that. And then, as a lot of you have seen, I have a big saltwater tank and I keep them all in the skimmer. Now I've got fresh bait then wherever I want to go, but what you can do is just freeze them down. That's what I used to do before I had a tank. So what I do, I just peel the actual tail of the prawn. So going underneath the prawn where the feet are, grabbing a bit of the shell and peeling it up. Now these small prawns are quite delicate, so you will find you'll break a few in half. And then nip the tail off. So I'm left with a peeled prawn. And as you can imagine, quite simply, just thread it on your hook. A prawn is a great bait when you're fishing tidal venues. Well, there we are. That is perfect there, look. So there's the prawn. Let's turn that camera back on. So there we are, look. If you can see, the hook is fully exposed at the bottom. I'm trying to spin it so hopefully you can see it. So it's fully exposed, and with it being quite a soft bait, it's easy for them to rip bits off and actually mouth the whole thing in, rather than if you put the shell on, they wouldn't actually be able to get to the actual prawns. They'll basically just put it in their mouth or go to mouth it and then realise that it's too hard for them to actually get in their mouth, and then they'll just drop it. But the one thing I will say when fishing with naturals like prawn and prawns and mackerel, is that you will pick up nuisance fish such as like your gobies, blennies, little schoolie bass, and depending on where you're fishing in the country, you might get wrasse, little pollock, that kind of stuff, and garfish. And the garfish you'll have them on bread anyway, but fishing with bits of mackerel ups your chance of catching garfish a lot. But you know, it's nice to catch a bit of a mix of species. But when you're dedicated your session for the mullet, you don't want to be wasting time catching too many of the smaller species. You want to be focusing on the mullet. So that is basically a much better explained video on baiting up those three baits. I'll go on to now is just show you some of my favourite patterned hooks and sizes for the mullet. Right, so when it comes to hook patterns and sizes, I use anything between a size 16 and a size 6. Most commonly used for me are 10s and 8s. They're my sort of more of a go-to size, because you go anything smaller and you don't need to go small. It's surprising when you catch a mullet, it's surprising how big their mouth are when you take a look. And if you can imagine, for instance, that chunk of mackerel or prawn, it's quite a big little chunk of bait for them to swallow. So if they can swallow that, they can swallow with like a size 10 hook. So my most commonly used hook is a Drennan specimen, and that's a size 10. Now I use micro barbed. I don't use barbless. The only time I'll ever use a barbless if I'm fishing in any coarse venues like a river or lake where you have to use a barbless. And I prefer micro barb than a normal barb because a smaller barb will go in easier. So it takes less pressure for a smaller barb to sink in, because obviously the bigger the barb, the bigger the hole needs to be for the hook to go in and actually secure in the fish's mouth. So yeah, the Drennan micro barb specimen is my top favourite, and also the wide gape specialist is also quite a favourite of mine. And they're sort of my two more favourites. Or these are barbless. I must have bought these when I was going coarse fishing. And another hook that I've done very well with, if I take this price tag off, it's easy for you to see the hooks. Another hook that I've actually done really well with, I find they hold in the fish's mouth really well, is a Corda mixer in a size 12 and 10s. I absolutely love these hooks. They are probably, I say the specimen is my favourite, but to be honest, I'd probably go for a mixer, to be honest. I find they are razor sharp, and I just love the pattern, which you can see the pattern on the actual packet there. They're just a nice wide gape on them for the size of the hook, and the actual point is so fine where it just doesn't take a lot for it to sink in and get a good hold. So yeah, they're normally my three favourites. I have used loads of different types. There's some little tiny BKKs there, or size 6s, little BKKs. What else have I got in here? More specimens.
These would be different ones here. Our blue pack. They're quite a traditional one as well, those there. They're not. And like I said before, about it's being a clip coming up, I take so much gear fishing like this when I don't even need to. But yeah, they're my three favourites. The mixers, the specimens, and the wide gape specialists. They are my three favourite patterns. And like I said, sizes anything between 16s up to 6s. So before I actually start fishing for them, I will have a quick mention about the net. Now, it's important to take a net with you. Basically, you have to for landing them. You can't land them any other way, really. If you'd be lucky to go down and grab them out of the water with your hands. So having a net is really important. The actual net itself is, any net will do, obviously. But the pole is, for me, is quite an important thing to have the reach. I use the Drennan Specialist long reach twist lock. They do two versions. This one I got is a 3.5. I think they do a 3 meter as well, or a bit shorter. I can't quite remember. But they are absolutely brilliant. You just literally just grab the end, just give it a twist, and there is on the actual inside, there's sort of little lines on there to show you when to stop. And that is obviously 3.5 meters. That is more than long enough for anything, really. Like here, I would need to extend it, but some marks you'd be fishing where you might need to reach down a little bit, fishing down on like off of ledges or harbour walls or marinas or anything. So yeah, a good quality long reach and pole is quite important. Right, so when you're ready, you're all set up, you're baited up, you're ready to get going, you're fishing. You need to know the depth of water you're fishing in. So with the float, you need to adjust the float stop to suit the depth of water you're fishing in. I normally like to go between a foot off the bottom and then obviously hard on the bottom. Now you can literally just flick it in the water and then wait for it to hit the float stop, and then adjust it until it's on the bottom. But the most quickest and accurate way of doing it is using a plummet. Now a plummet is basically a small weight there with a hole in the top and then a bit of cork around the edge. Now this is just to gauge the depth of water and set your float perfectly. So you get your plummet there and you put your hook through the eye, so it's in a sense is running on your line, and then hook it into the cork. So that is literally held on there like so. Now this then overweights the float, and this will gauge your depth. So I'll flick it out by here and it will sink down. And right, so I'm fishing too shallow now because my float's been pulled right under. So what I will do is slowly lift the float up until I can just about see it, or I can see it there. So my float stop needs to move up about half a foot, I'd say, maybe a little bit more. It's quite deep, about 8 foot, I think. Just let that go down. Let's take it under, and that is. I'm literally fishing hard on the bottom now. I can just about see my float, and as the swell goes down, the float comes back up. So that is literally perfect if I was fishing hard on the bottom. So all I'm going to do is just push my float stop where it is. Obviously fishing a clear float stop doesn't help, but I'm going to just pull my float stop down towards my float about half a foot, and then I know for a fact now my bait is going to be half a foot off the bottom. But obviously fishing a tidal venue, that will change through the session. So every like 10-15 minutes I might just lift the float stop, push the float stop down a little bit or lift it up a little bit, depending on what stage of tide you're fishing. So that is setting your float to make sure you're fishing perfectly on your spot. Now I'm going to get some bread on the hook and we can start fishing then. Right, so I'm now ready, I'm all baited up. But the first thing I will do before I start fishing is just get a little bit more ground bait in. And I'll just literally just tip a little bit in. Don't have to be too much. That's perfect. Now one thing I will say, you're better off getting a ladle to just scoop it in and throw it out there. Because I'm just not using my hands because it just gets everywhere then. And as the sun dries on your hands, dries the bread on your hands, it's horrible. It just gets all minging on your hands, especially when you've got mackerel in there, like I said. But anyway, so we got a nice, I can see some tiny little fish on there now actually. It's created a little bit of a cloud. All the crush has come to the top, which the seagulls will end up picking off. But you can see, I'm hoping you can see it, but it's pulling it out a little bit of an angle. So I just drop it right in by here where I set the float. Because it's important to fish your float where you set it. Because if I set your float depth there and then fish over there, it's not going to be as accurate. And what you will find is the bread will, obviously the bread is very buoyant, so it's going to lift your float up a little bit as it takes on the water, and then it will pull it down slightly. That's all set in perfectly. Now what is quite a good little tip is I fish my bail arm open. So obviously I set my drag looser than what you'd actually think, because I'd rather play a fish on a really light drag and just use my fingers, just put a little bit of tension on the side of the spool. So I normally fish the bail arm open and let the float just go out with the tide. I wouldn't let it go out ridiculously far. I just let it go out with the ground bait so it just flows out with the natural. And just keeping an eye on the float, obviously, for any little movements. Now with the bites with the mullet, they can vary between a few. They can just pull the float under and just shoot straight off with it. And they will also, you'll have the float. Now you won't be able to see it because it's, obviously the float's very small. Just for you to spot it, it'd be quite difficult, I'd imagine, on camera. But you will have it where they'll give it very like juddery little bites. And that's where they're literally sucking and blowing it in their mouth and just mouthing it. And you will find as they'll actually grab it, they'll slowly move up with it and your float will come right up. And sometimes it will actually lay back down flat where they picked all the weight up from the float and it'll lay down flat. So you call them a lifter as well. Now, you don't want to leave too much. See, that's just going to, I wouldn't, where it is now, I wouldn't leave it any further. I'll give it a couple of seconds, I'll reel it in. But what I will say is you don't want to let too much line out between your float and your rod tip, because that's more distance you got to actually lift the rod to strike. So the shorter the line, the quicker of a reaction you're going to have and quicker connection to the fish. So I'm just going to slowly reel that back now. So it's in where we set it. Now if you reel it quite gently and slow, you will be able to leave the same piece of bread on, but if you're really quite quick and give it too much movement in your rod, it'll end up pulling the bread off and you'll have to put a new piece on. But I gotta be honest, this is such an enjoyable way of fishing because there's hardly any gear needed and it's just very relaxing, I will say that. I mean, any fishing by the sea is relaxing, but this is a very simple way of fishing, and it's just nice to do something different, I suppose. Well, I've had a really good sign then. I've seen a couple of mullet go past. They're only small, just coming up for the ground bait they were. So I just flicked a little bit more in, just a tiny little bit, and they were probably only about, I'd say one of them was probably about half a pound, but they weren't like tiny. It's a lovely sign to see him going past, because the water's not really that murky today. It's quite a nice clarity to it. So that's a very good sign to see him. Right, so I readjust the depth of my float to fish a bit higher up in the water. And I'm also going to get out the blitz bread that I used, that I made last night. So first things, I'm just going to quickly rebait the hook so it's ready to cast out. Oh, so the blitz bread is, as you can see, it's so fine and fluffy. It's perfect for fishing higher up in the water. So I just give it a good squeeze. I throw it out there, and as the water breaks it down, it literally just sprinkles down lovely. It's brilliant for fishing like this. Check out one more. Perfect. Right, so as that goes down through the water, it should cloud the water a little bit, and it just brings the fish up in the water as well. And right, so we're fishing about mid-water, I'd imagine now. I'll give that a bit there, and I'll just keep adjusting it. Like, it's never going to be a set depth. You will find it varies differently through the day or through the session. So we'll give that its little drift now, and we'll adjust it if needs be. You will find in the sea when you're fishing like this, you do have to work through the little fish to get to the bigger ones, because there's so many of those little ones compared to the big ones. But when you do hook a big one eventually, you've got a fight on your hands. They go really well, mullet. They're probably one of your best fighting fish you could possibly catch, in my opinion, on the lighter gear. Like bass and pollock and all that kind of stuff, and wrasse, they fight well, but mullet will never give up in a fight. They are incredible fighting fish. Right, so I thought I'd give you a little rundown over all the extra sort of things I bring mullet in, aside from my main setup. Just all the stuff I keep in my bag just to do me through the session, in case I want to chop and change anything. So starting with the floats, now as you can imagine, they're really thin plastic, they're very delicate, they're easy to break. So a form of storage for your floats is very important. Like, I do normally bring quite a few, but in all honesty, I put one on, I very rarely change it. If I'm fishing landlocked water where it's really still, there's no tide, I might go down to a really light float. Like, these are quite good. Well, the Drennan glow tip antenna is the name of the float. You can see the actual tip there. It's almost like a lighthouse looking thing to it, but they're brilliant. So I love them. You can set them so it's just that poking out the water, and with those lines it's really easy to see little delicate bites. So I'd like to have a tube that's basically a float storage. I'm not sure what the actual names of them are, but this one here I bought, actually I think I bought it in Cyprus. It's just got the little lid that pops off, and it's actually on a thread, so you can just twist it and it extends, and then you tighten it and it obviously reduces the length. And they're perfect because it just keeps loads of, pretty much all of my float. I got 2 of these actually full of floats, and it just keeps them safe. It just keeps them obviously all in one place, and it's nice to put that in your rucksack. You know you're not going to break any. And then moving on, a pair of scissors is the obvious one really. I keep a folding bait knife. That's a Bubba blade one, bought out in America. It's not really something I do take mullet in a lot, really, a knife, but if I got mackerel with me, I will. I do keep the odd occasional mullet for food, but it's not really something I do very often. So it's obviously, if I do keep one to eat, I can gut it and clean it out in the water before I take it back home. And then I got a little tub here full of all my sort of end tackle. So in here I've got a few little tubs of different size split shots. There's some SSGs, AAAs, and then 2 little tiny tubs here with some spare float stops, and in the bottom where there's some little beads and swivels in there. And then I'm probably, well, I've never met anyone worse than me, but I take so many hooks, different patterns and different sizes. Anything between, there's 16s all the way up to size 6s in here. Loads of different size patterns. They're all micro barbed. I don't really use barbless, to be honest. It's not really something I use. It's normally barbed or micro barbed. And then there's some little float stops there, more float stops. Again, I got loads for some reason. A knot puller, which is handy for the little tiny hooks. And then I've got quite a big variety of sized olivettes here, the Drennan olivettes. If I just give you a quick look at them. So that's them there. So I got all different sizes from 3 gram all the way down to 0.5 grams. And then I got a couple plummets to obviously set the float to the depth of water you're fishing in. And that's pretty much all the gear you need. Oh, and the float sleeves, they're brilliant for attaching your float. Like I said earlier on, you literally just slide it on and off. And then, like I say, when I leave, I just slide that off, put the float in the tube, and then I can leave the rod set up for my next session without having to wind the break in the float. Now that is literally all you need. It's just a little tub worth of, like, just a few bits in there. That's literally it. You don't really need much when you're mullet fishing. Like, there's very slim chance of losing your setup. You might lose it if you get a big mullet and it cuts you off on some rock somewhere, maybe. But typically with a mullet, they're quite clean fighters. They fight high up in the water. Typically they do. It's like the bass. They're fighting quite high up in the water. So the chance of them cutting your line off on a rock is quite slim, especially like in a deeper water venue like this. And then also another thing you can get is just a little mixed tub of split shots. So you got all the way up to SSGs, you got AAAs, 8s, BBs, 6s, 4s and 1s. Like, I don't ever use anything between a size 4, 6 and 8. They're too small really for the floats I use. But I just thought I'd bring that with me to show you, because it's just easy. You grab that, no matter what float you do buy, they can pretty much handle any float setup. And then also, I mean, a rag actually, because if you've ever caught mullet, the scales come off them quite easy, so it's good to keep a rag because your hands get stinking and the smell of them, it can be strong to say the least. And then when it comes to weighing the fish, if you wanted to, I just got a little set of scales in there, and then weighing them. They're not like, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of putting the scales in the fish's jaw or the gill cavity and hanging the fish. I normally either weigh it in a bag or a sling. And mullet are very delicate, like with the scales, they come off so easy. So I've just bought this little, I can't remember what brand it is, I think it's a Gardner, whatever it is. Yeah, it is. Little Gardner fish sling. Now these are for the coarse fishing scene, and they're perfect really. You give it a wet before you weigh your fish, and it's really soft, it's not going to damage a fish, and it also folds up to nothing, so just stuff it in your bag and you don't even notice there. And I think that's basically it really. And obviously I talked about the net. It's always good to have an extendable net, your rod. That's about it really. It's not really a lot you need for mullet fishing. Like I said, that is literally all I need. There's very few stuff. Like, I've been mullet fishing before, I haven't even taken a bag. I'll just put a few bits in my pocket to have a bit of a walk, and that's all you need really. It's quite simple fishing, to be honest. So I'm going to get back to it now. We got a drop in tide now, so the tide's quite strong. So I'm going to make a move into the corner where the steps are and try and get out of this flow, because as I'm baiting up, it's just pulling out to sea, and it's too fast of a flow. So I'm gonna keep on fishing for another hour or so and see if I can pull one out for you to see. Now, it is not looking the best, I will say that, to get one on camera for you, but I'm trying. There was a lot of fish around this morning. There's so many small ones where it's hard to get through to them. I knew it'd be like that down here, but I just figured I'd rather come here where I can guarantee they're going to be, and I can always sort of, you know, try and work my way through them to a bigger fish. I mean, I did see a couple of fish earlier on that were about a pound in size. But anyway, I'm going to move back into the corner, try and lose the tide, and see if I can get one on camera for you guys. So cross your fingers, everyone, and I'm doing my best. Well guys, today I'm going to break a rule that I set for myself right at the start when I started my YouTube channel, and that is that I would never upload a video if I didn't catch a fish. But it's a how-to video, I suppose. So the method that I use to catch mullet has been explained, but catching the mullet and showing the mullet hasn't been obviously shown. But like I said, it is still a little bit early in the season for targeting them in the sea. I even know a few guys that are fishing Barry Dock, and they said it's very patchy at the minute. They're not really coming out in numbers like they should be this time of year. But we've had really bad weather the past, I mean, 3 weeks now, maybe a month. Well, not that long, probably three weeks at the most. So it's been tough going really. It hasn't been as warm as it should be, so that's obviously dropped the water temperature down a bit more than what it should be. But there's one thing I want to explain before I end the video, and that is when fighting the fish, there's one thing you can do that really helps to keep that hook set in their mouth, because they're easy to pull the hooks on. So two things. I think I explained it earlier on, that it's fishing a light drag, a lighter than what you would think you should set it at, and I use my middle finger on the side of the spool, and when I need to apply tension, I use apply pressure, I use my middle finger and just put a little bit of pressure on the side of the spool just to slow the fish down. And then another one, and this is more so going when you're fishing a bit more of a stiffer tipped rod like the spinning rods, is when you're fighting the fish, you'll see a lot of people, they'll fight a fish and they'll put the butt of the rod up against a forearm and then fighting the fish like so. But that is a lot of pressure to put on the fish, and sometimes with mullet they'll give a few head shakes and just really short aggressive bolts where they'll just shoot off and take some line. So what you want to do is fish it off your wrist, because you've got a lot more movement in your wrist to absorb the lunges and the little head shakes they give. So fishing like that, very little pressure it takes, and it's not going to apply too much pressure, then it's going to risk pulling the hooks of the fish. Whereas like that is solid, but that is a lot more spongy. I hope that makes sense. That goes with a lot of fishing, to be honest. Where you're fishing for fish that you can easily pull the hooks on. So that's one thing I wanted to explain, but preferably I would have explained that when the rod's bent over hooked into a mullet. But there we are, that is me done. Rule broken. Oh, but what can you do? You can only catch what's there at the end of the day, and the mullet weren't there today. So I am now going to leave. I'm done. The mullet have beaten me. But I definitely will be back. I promise you, I will do a few videos this summer actually catching mullet. I'm also going to do a video fishing in Barry Dock, which should be a good video because I know Barry Dock quite well. I've fished it a lot. I've had a lot of big mullet in there, up to 7 pound. And it's just a great venue to fish, especially for the younger anglers. And even those who aren't able to access marks like this, come down the steps along the slippery rocks and stuff, whether you're in a wheelchair or what, Barry Dock is brilliant for that. So that'll be another video, probably end of the month. So yeah, well, weather depending, I'll gauge that off. So I've done my best, and that wasn't good enough, let's say that. But I hope you found it useful, and as usual, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.